Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Scree gear is more than apparel. It's a tribute to the relentless, the tireless, the true guardians of the wilderness. It's for those who seek not just a game, but a legacy. Not just a sport, but a way of life. Our gear, you're more than a hunter. You're a story, a tradition, a legend in the making. Scree is your journey, your triumph, your success. Join the working man revolution. Success awaits.
Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of CastingAcross.com, where I explore the core and culture of fly fishing. This is the 404th episode of the podcast, and today we're talking about what to do when it appears that your gear is inadequate for the situation, when you don't have the equipment that it seems like you should have in order to fish in the way that is going to be the most efficient and effective. Now, first things first, if you've listened to me or read me for any length of time, you know that I believe that there can be a tension within fly fishing, that there is gear that is best suited for situations and that has been designed by anglers so that you can nymph in a particular way, cast a certain line with a certain speed, wade for a certain stability need, things like that. All of those things, whether they be sunglasses or reels or fly boxes, everything has a purpose, right? There are not a lot of things out there that are getting created just to make stuff. So I believe that that is true, that there are not just niche, but truly specialized aspects of fly fishing that gear has been designed to meet. But the other thing I think is also true is that you should, from a skill perspective, be a generalist. You should be able to use that 9-foot 6-weight in all varieties of situations. You can throw a streamer, you can throw a dry fly, you can throw a nymph with that 9-foot 6-weight, and you can be happy with that. You can even use that in a small mountain stream. You can even use that for bass, and you shouldn't feel bad that you don't have 25 fly rods. So again, these are the two things that we have to hold in tension. We have to hold in concert with one another. And I never want anything I say on the podcast or anything I write about to make someone feel like, I really would do better if, I really would be a more complete angler if, I would really be happy, joyful in my fly fishing if I made this purchase. Now, there's some things I'm really, really happy I've bought. But I think what it comes down to is understanding that how you fish really, really trumps what you fish with. And that's actually kind of how I want to start this as episode off, is that when I started fly fishing when I was a teenager, I had 2 rods. I started with a really, really low end, just kind of like sporting goods store, 8.5 foot, 5-6 weight, right? Not graphite, not fiberglass, just some sort of composite. And it worked just fine. I caught lots of fish that I could cast with it. It was a great learning tool. Then I got a 7-foot 3-weight, and that was a St. Croix rod, and I'd saved my pennies for it. And I just really, really enjoyed fishing this 7-foot 3-weight, such that I used it for almost everything. And so what it forced me to do was learn how to throw weighted nymph rigs with a 7-foot 3-weight, learn how to mend line with a 7-foot 3-weight, learn how to throw heavy streamers with a 7-foot 3-weight, learn how to throw a poly leader with a 7-foot 3-weight. And I would not trade that experience for the world. If anything, I remember when I got my next fly rod, which is a 9-foot 6-weight, it was a Sage rod, a Graphite 3 Sage rod that I really liked, and I liked fishing on bigger rivers. But when I got into kind of those medium-sized streams, I really felt so much more comfortable with some of the accommodations that I had come to get used to with fishing that 7-foot 3-weight. So I would say that it's all fine and good to buy a specialty fly rod. And again, if you have that 3 and that 5 and that 9, that's a great little spread of fly rods. But especially if you're starting off in fly fishing, don't feel like you need to check every box. Don't feel like the back of your hatchback needs to look like the back of the guide's pickup truck and everything that's in there. And so today what we're going to talk about is kind of overcoming 3 equipment-based obstacles when you are fishing. We're going to talk about, first and foremost, what happens if you don't have weight. You don't have a weighted fly, you don't have a weighted line, and you need your pattern to get down. And that's the first thing we're going to talk about. How do you overcome that? The second we're going to talk about is if you don't have the right fly, particularly in a hatch, you see those fish popping off, you don't have the right fly, what do you do? And thirdly, we're going to talk about if you don't have waders, either you're traveling or you just forgot them or they get a hole in them. What do you do if you don't have waders and you still want to fish? So no weight, no flies, no right flies, and no waders. So we'll work through all 3 of these things. And these are 3 things that I can say I have personal experience with. And so this is not theoretical. This is practical. So first thing, well, let me tell you what. First thing is don't be afraid to go to the fly shop, especially like this first one. No weight. If you don't have the cone head streamers, but you have the unweighted streamers, and you're close to a fly shop, then just go drop $10 and buy 3, 4, hopefully 4 streamers. If you need some split shot for your nymph rig, go to the fly shop and get that little tub of split shot. Now you have 2. Honestly, if I were to say the one piece of gear I forget more than anything else, it's split shot. Why I don't just keep a little puck of various sizes of shot in each and every one of my packs, I don't know. But I do always forget it. Not always. I most often forget it. But getting back to kind of the point at hand, if you can't go to a fly shop, if you just have your gear on you or you just don't want to spend $5 or $10, then there's some things that you can do to get your fly down. And the first one is the simplest, and that's cast further upstream. Just cast further upstream. If you see a lie in front of you where you assume there's a trout, it's there's a depression in the water, there's a boulder in the water, there's an undercut bank, and you just know that this particular place where there's this overhanging weed cover is where you want that subsurface pattern. Just cast further upstream, allow it to get down, giving it a longer runway. And in doing so, a couple things happen. One, you are fishing an unweighted pattern, which sometimes has a more natural drift, especially if you're fishing a nymph. But also, you're simply just tapping into a normal fly fishing skill that gives you a lot of flexibility. If your target is directly in front of you, your target is perpendicular to where you are in relation to the stream bank, you're always going to have to cast upstream, with the exception of maybe throwing a hopper or something where that fish is going to hit instantaneously. You're always going to have to cast upstream. You just have to be competent in certain skills so that a cast that's very far upstream gets down to where you want it to go. So if it's a 2 or 3 or 4 foot depth, then you have to take that into account. The speed of the water, you have to take that into account. The intervening currents between where you are and where your fly happens to be, you have to take those things into account. So it's not just a longer casting distance. It's not just a little bit more trigonometry and figuring out exactly where you need to place it. It's also being able to mend well. And this is where skill is such an important factor. You could take the mindset of, I don't need to mend more than I have to, or I don't need to cast further than I have to. I can always just adapt my fly to the situation. Well, you're not always going to have each fly in each weight that you can grab to deal with the situation and accommodate where that trout lies. But you can always make more amends. You can always cast further. So again, ideally, you kind of have those 2 things I've been talking about earlier. One, you have everything you would ever need and then some. But on the other hand, you have all the skills that you need to overcompensate for any sort of deficiencies that you have in your fly box. So I would always err on the side, and that's a lot of what we're talking about today, err on the side of having the skills as opposed to having the stuff, because you can have the stuff and still hit a brick wall eventually. But if you have the skills, those ceilings are much, much, much higher. So, cast further upstream is, I think, the first thing. And then I would also say that you could use currents. So pay attention to those currents. If you notice how water interacts with the objects that happen to be in it, it can be such a valuable tool if you don't have a weighted line, a polyleader, or a weighted fly or split shot. Look at how when a small fly hits a seam, what happens? A fly is moving along at a pretty steady clip. It hits a seam where there is a kind of a variation in the current and in the speed, and it'll either go up in the water or down in the water column, depending on what angle it is coming at. If the faster water is closer to you, if the faster water is further away from you, there's going to be something that happens there. If it is going around a boulder, that boulder can act in a phenomenal way by sucking that fly down in the water column and putting it probably in the place where the fish is, because of the current doing that to all the naturals that are coming by 24/7. So pay attention to that. One of the best ways to figure that out, I like using a small, bright marabou streamer, like a woolly bugger. You can use it in a white or a yellow or something like that, and just watch how that fly gets messed with by the current. Use an unweighted fly, use a beadhead fly, use a conehead fly, wrap a little bit of lead, I said a dirty word, put a little bit of weight above that fly, and watch how the current interacts with that, and how things change when that fly hits different places in the current. If it goes up against a downed log, if it goes up against a stream bank, if it goes up against a stream bank and then the riverbank comes towards you or goes away from you, what happens when it goes into that open water? What happens when it gets kind of shoved along that stream bank? Just paying attention to all those fun hydrodynamics. Now, there are so many variables we can't see and we can't identify at a more minute level, just because of how intricately water moves and interacts with itself, just the nature of liquids. But being able to kind of quickly ascertain, all right, I see a slower seam on the other side of this quicker seam I'm fishing. I can use that to my advantage, cast in between those, pull my fly into it, and the drift is going to get shot down because of those two different currents interacting with one another. But using a boulder is another way to do that. Using a plunge pool, of course, is a great way to get that fly down. Most of my nymphing is done with very, very small beadheads on small mountain streams, because I want that thing to drift in a way that is going to be very, very natural, and you can use those plunge pools to really get that fly down and get it down deep. And then the last thing I'd say on this is you can always use lighter tippets. It's going to make a little bit of a difference, but it's going to make some difference in getting that fly down in the water column. And then also cast less. And what that does is it allows your fly to stay saturated when you are picking up from your presentation to making your next cast. So those things are very, very simple, and they're going to make the smallest amount of difference. I mean, it's probably very, very minuscule, but if you're talking about a few inches over the course of a 10-foot drift, then that might be what you need to get it in that feeding zone of that fish. So whether that be dropping down a tippet size or even a half tippet size, or making sure you're casting less so that fly stays saturated with water, then that fly can get down. So that's the first example. If you don't have the weight, you don't have the polyleader, you don't have the split shot, you don't have the weighted line, you can still get those flies down if you just make some alterations to your cast, to your presentation, utilizing the currents, and potentially even changing up other aspects of your gear. Second one, don't have the right fly, especially during a hatch. And I'm going to make this very, very narrow. We could talk about this in a number of other applications, but today's is very, very narrow. You are seeing fish rise, and you knew that sulfurs were going to be out. and you have got some big duns, you have some spinners, and you're just so excited because there's these big, basically white flies that these trout are gulping down. And so you've got your nice size 14 spinner dun. You maybe even have a parachute, so it's just super easy to see. You've got that thing greased up with floatant. You've got your favorite dry fly rod. You make your perfect casts, and those flies go uneaten. They drift right over all these feeding trout. You find a trout, you cast to it, you keep putting your fly over it. As soon as that fly goes over its head, it comes and eats another insect, and all of a sudden the joy and the excitement turns to great frustration and potentially even fury. Well, you probably know what is happening, right? They're taking emergers. And I've had this situation so frequently where I've got the hatch, that I think I'm going to be fishing, and the fish are either not taking dries or they are vastly preferring the emerger to the dry. And there's a number of reasons for this that we don't have time to go into. They're an easier prey, particularly with some insect species that will skitter and fly off. They're right there in the surface film, so fish are all about that equation of less effort for more calories. But emergers is what they're going after, okay? And to a certain degree, you can tell this by the rise form. Again, that's something that we don't have time to go into today. But all that said, you're making your cast with your dry fly, and they are not going for it at all. And so you look in your box and you don't have the emerger version of that pattern. And someone might say, oh, well, why would you fish a hatch and not have, all life cycles and 15 different permutations with slight color variations? All right, not everybody has that. Not everybody is going to necessarily go and tie a bunch of flies for their trip or go to the fly shop. They're just going to use what they have in their box, knowing that they have kind of the essentials. So that doesn't mean you're out of luck. I think that this is probably one of the easiest things to do. If you don't have that emerger, then just let that dry sink down a little bit. I've had just absolutely spectacular days where I've drowned my dry fly. I greased the leader up so that it only does sink down the water column, maybe an inch, maybe even its big post is still riding in the surface film with like a parachute fly. But fish that, and it's amazing how many fish will still take it. If you want to, you can even modify it. I've done this before where I take a lot of the hackle off of like a dun mayfly. And so you've just got wings and a body and a tail. And if you grease those wings or grease the tail or grease both, it's going to ride very, very flush with that surface film, and you're going to imitate an emerger. Look at how an emerger is tied. A lot of times it is, and this is a very crass and crude way of describing it, it's a dry fly without wings, right? And so you're going to use that the wings that are there, either trimming them down or trimming the hackle down, and use that as kind of your anchor point to the surface tension, and go ahead and fish that fly. But you can do this kind of vice versa. If you only have nymphs, I've had it before where fish are feeding with reckless abandon, and I have greased up a nymph form of the dry, and they've taken that out of the surface film. So it depending on what's happening, don't feel like you are confined to the box of where you would find that fly in the bins at the fly shop. If, whatever you have at your disposal, feel like you have the flexibility to fish it however you can to try to elicit a strike. Just be cognizant of what those fish are eating. What is the profile that they're going for? What is the silhouette that they're looking for? And then look in your box, and even if the color is not perfectly right, even if the size isn't perfectly right, there's plenty of times where I go up one size or down one size from what I'm holding in my hand that I grabbed off the water or grabbed out of the air, and that is precisely what the fish are keying in on for whatever reason. And so don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to mess with your flies. Don't be afraid to do things like greasing the leader and not the fly. All of that stuff is a great way, if you don't have the patterns in your box that you think you need, to try something else. All right, so no weight, no flies. Thirdly, no waders. This is the easiest one, honestly. Just fish the banks. There's nothing wrong with it. Think about what you do when you are out fishing. You wade out into the middle of the river and you cast to the bank. Now, I know it's nice because you don't have anything behind you in those situations. You're able to have your line on the water and mend it, but your fly can still get in the same spot if you're fishing from the bank. This is beneficial if you are going on vacation. I've had plenty of times where I have space for a rod and a reel and my core tackle. I don't have space for waders. I might only have space for like sandals or something like that. And so my wading consists of kind of getting my feet wet, maybe, up to my calves. But I'm definitely not going to go waist deep in cold water up in the mountains or in a tailwater. And so you just fish the banks, cast upstream, mend, cast downstream. We talked about this last week. There's lots of reasons to cast downstream. Another reason why you might want to fish the banks if the water is really, really high and it would be dangerous to wade. Well, fish are going to get some reprieve from that strong current of high water by getting up against and even underneath and into something like the bank. And so fishing those spots from those spots can be very, very beneficial. In fact, you are going to be able to do a better job of getting that streamer underneath an undercut bank if you're fishing from the bank than if you're fishing from out in the middle of the river. So there's plenty of times where I've got wide open casting space, where I have all the room in the world to operate, but I prefer to make a slightly upstream presentation up against the bank and then keeping my rod tip close to that bank, make the kind of strips that I need to keep that streamer super duper close. Another fantastic presentation is you do that downstream. You do a nice drift, letting out line enough that you still have some tension on that line if you were to get a strike, but then do quick strips up parallel with that stream bank. And you're going to get that fly so much closer to the undercut bank than you ever could if you were in the middle of the stream casting towards the stream. Remember, all fish love structure, all fish love cover, and banks oftentimes afford both of those things. So just because you don't have your waders, just because your waders maybe ripped, totally blew out. I had one situation where the sole of one of my waders fell off, and it was, as beneficial as having those wading boots on when I was in the water and the traction it gave me, having no sole and just having this kind of like rigid, not even rubber, but just some sort of synthetic material bottom. It was that much slipperier. And so I fished basically from the bank and from sandbars I could find the rest of that day. Something like that might happen. Or it could just be the water's really high. It's not safe to wade. Or it could be that you just didn't have the opportunity, or you're not there yet. You're new in angling. You're giving this fly fishing, stuff a shot. And you've maybe been sold this idea that you need the fancy waders and the fancy boots and all the other stuff to fish. Rod, reel, line, go to trout stream, fish the banks. You can do well. Yes, access might be trickier, but there's plenty of places where you can do this. So, all right, that's a lot of stuff. 3 things: no weight, no flies, no waders. Not no flies. No flies of the precisely right varietal. That's what we're talking about. But those are 3 examples of where you might not have the perfect equipment, but you still can fish. And like I said before, I'm cool with these tensions, right? It's nice to have the gear that's perfectly designed for the situation that you're in, but it's almost better to have the gear that you have and that you like fishing with. It's nice to have things that are particularly suited for the circumstances you encounter. It's better to have a skill set that can accommodate what you happen to have, a more broad general loadout of fly fishing gear for circumstances that you may encounter. Because everybody, the guy with the 3 4-banger rod roof rack. So they've got, a dozen fly rods up on the top of their roof, and they have a big, toolbox full of flies in the back of their truck. They're still going to have to figure things out. They're still going to have to do the hard work of figuring out how things work and realize they don't have the exact precise thing. So all that to say, get out there and fish, enjoy yourself. Don't be burdened or weighed down by what you have or what you do not have. This week's articles on castingacross.com. The first is called Fly Fishing Books, 14. So there's a lot more than 14 fly fishing book articles on castingacross.com. But this is actually kind of a callback to the way that most of my book articles looked for the first probably 8 or 9 years of the website, where I give a recommendation for a guidebook, a recommendation for more of a technique book, and a recommendation for a like a literature, an example of somebody giving a story or something like that, and then a bonus book. And so here I give 4 books, a couple of which I have covered on the videos, and also some new ones. So you can check that out. Wednesday's article is called Video, the Definitive Word on a Premier River, in which I showcase Steve Colton's fly fishing guide to the Farmington River. The Farmington is in central Connecticut. It's a tailwater. So you put those two things together. It is incredibly fishable year-round, and it's incredibly accessible to a high concentration of the East Coast population. So this is a great book. I read it cover to cover. I'm looking forward to going and fishing the Farmington. Steve's a great guy, great communicator, so I highly recommend that book to you. This week's recommendation on the podcast, while it is fresh in my mind, is to put the Fly Fishing Show on your calendar. And I'm going to add to it. So the Fly Fishing Show has a number of stops. Starts off here in beautiful New England, in Massachusetts, in Marlborough, and then it moves its way to a handful of other shows. New Jersey is the biggest one, of course. The Colorado one is getting bigger and bigger every year. But then there's also the Virginia Fly Fishing and Wine Festival, which I think is maybe, if not the first show of the season. It is the new show, the Tennessee... I'm sorry. Bo Beasley puts these things together. I don't have it in my notes. The Tennessee Fly Fishing and Bourbon Festival, Fly Fishing and Whiskey Festival, whatever it is, it's going to be good. But the Virginia show is great. The Tennessee one seeks to do something very similar. So I'll put links both to the Fly Fishing Show schedule and the Fly Fishing and Wine, Fly Fishing and Bourbon show websites on this podcast page at castingacross.com. You can check them out there. But then, of course, there's going to be local shows. But you might say, it's August. We still got all of fall fishing season. Well, let me tell you, you don't get it on the calendar now, something else is going to be there. So take advantage of this opportunity. Throw it on that family calendar that you have digitally. Grab that wall calendar and flip to where it gives you, January, February, March, April in little square boxes, because it's the 2026 calendar and that's 2027, and write it in there in pen. And then you will have less excuses why you cannot go. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.